Hello, viewers. This is Dr. Kamar Chima, and today we are going to have a conversation at the Sanober Institute about India-US strategic partnership implications for Pakistan. For this, we have an excellent panel. We have with us Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry. He's a former Foreign Secretary and the Chairman Sanober Institute. And we have our special guest today, Dr. Kamran Bukhari. He's a Senior Director of the Eurasian Security and Prosperity at the New Lines Institute, Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Dr. Kamran Bukhari, and thank you very much, Ambassador Azaz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamar.
Thank you. So today's conversation is about India-US strategic partnership. We have heard a lot about this. Last year, when Prime Minister Modi was in Washington, he met President Biden, and it was the partnership was announced as a comprehensive global strategic partnership. That India is going to be America's partner globally about almost every issue. And we have seen recently that how Americans are engaging in Indo-Pacific, particularly at different platforms like Quad, I2U2, and even bilaterally. And even we have seen recently there is an India-US dialogue on Africa. So there is a lot to talk on that, that how India-US partnership is growing, despite the fact India is chanting slogans like strategic autonomy. And the Americans don't like this, where Prime Minister Modi was in Moscow. The American ambassador in India, Mr. Eric, said that there is no such thing like strategic autonomy in the times of conflict. We would like to understand and try to know this from Kamran Bukhari, but with the opening remarks from Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry on this particular subject. Sir, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamar, for picking up this very important subject. I am sure the world has seen how the recent upsurge in India and US strategic partnership has grown over time. But this was not always the case. For the first 50 years of India's independence India's existence as an independent country, India was not really close to the US. In fact, it was quite clearly tilted towards the Soviet Union. And it is only recently that we saw that the Indo-US relationship has morphed into a strategic partnership of massive proportions. Now, the major dynamic, I think, driving that transformation of relationship is the geopolitics of the day, mainly the competition with China, a rising power, which was in a position to challenge US hegemony. And India has been chosen by the US as its strategic partner, as its preferred partner, as a counterweight to China. So essentially, I think it's the geopolitics which have driven both countries closer. What has further helped, I think, this relationship is India's own growing economic profile, particularly since 1991, when India opened up its economy to the rest of the world. I was really struck by the fact that in 1991, India was 136th largest economy of the world. And today it is fifth largest economy and aspiring to be third largest. So you can see very clearly that India would be a natural choice for the US, being a large market, but also more importantly for its main geopolitical goals in the Asia Pacific region. So this US tilt naturally has many security implications, not only for Pakistan, but for the whole of South Asia and Southern Asia. How would that manifest? I think we would like to learn from Mr. Bukhari, but also during our discussion, we'll see if we can discover some new aspects of the implications of this relationship for whole region in South Asia.
Yes. So, Dr. Kamran, since you are based in Washington and you do understand how things are unfolding there, particularly we would like to understand from you this how Americans are going to cope up or engage with India when it talks of strategic autonomy, and even the State Department have to give clarifications in the Congress about India's strategic autonomy. Just recently, I think Donald Lu gave that clarification. Earlier, Secretary of State Antony Blinken gave that clarification that India is our partner, and with every passing day, India is moving away from Russia. So, how do you see this India's position on India talking about strategic autonomy, but getting all the incentives from Washington D.C.? What's the pulse on that, there, sir?
Oh, so thank you, Kamar, for inviting me, and it's an honor to be with Ambassador Azad. Look, there's not much the United States can do to sort of compel India. India is a power unto its own. It's as the ambassador said, he's fifth largest economy and aiming and aspiring to be the third largest, overtaking both Germany and Japan at some point in the next decade, if not sooner. So the United States can't just sort of expect that the Indians will come and align with Washington on everything. So by strategic autonomy, I mean it's a fancy word, but it does have meaning. I mean, it's not one of those buzzwords. It does convey something. It depicts Indian strategic behavior, and it's no secret that the United States has essentially given a pass to India in terms of buying oil from Russia all during the war with Ukraine, and that's an understanding. That's what India needs. The United States also understands that, look, India for the longest time, and even as we speak, the estimates say that as much as 60% of India's military hardware needs are fulfilled by Russia. Now, we can talk about how that is degrading, but this is the overall reality. I mean, just in the last few days, there is a debate going on, it appears, within the ruling party in India as to, what kind of, if you will, de-escalation with China will take place. But there is this debate over should we have Chinese investments or not? We've had conflicting statements come out from the finance minister of India, who said that this is a good idea. There are certain sectors that are not sort of critical from security point of view, in which we can welcome China's investments. Only to have the trade minister come and say we're not doing that. And so it does reflect a bit of a struggle within the ruling party. But nonetheless, these are realities. Why is India even talking about, an investment relationship with China? It's because it needs it, and the Americans are aware of that. The Americans know. I mean, yes, for the longest time, as Ambassador Saab laid out earlier, that look, India was in the Russian camp, in the Soviet camp for a long time, and that was understood. But over the last 30 years, India has developed what the Kazakhs have coined as multi-vector foreign policy, where you maintain relations with everybody. And if you look at India's behavior, it's not just the big powers, Russia, China, the United States. If you just look at the Middle East, the Indian government has had good relations with all powers that do not necessarily get along with each other. So you have a robust relationship with the state of Israel. You have a robust relationship with the Arab states, particularly in the Gulf, and you have a relationship that is significant with the Iranians. So this is sort of the MO of India, and it's not about to change. And I think the Americans, understand that. They're willing to give it time. But India is a rising geoeconomic player, and the question for American strategists is, how do you incorporate such an India into the broader, international architecture and the U.S. management system for the world? So I think that is the challenge. As to those rumblings in Congress and statements from officials in the executive branch, they're just sort of par for the course. I mean, they they have to respond. A congressional official in a hearing will say, "Oh, what? So tell me what's happening with India. Why are they doing this?" So they will have to respond. So that's just managing things on the home front. But strategically, I think that there are limits to how close the Indians are going to get with the Americans, and the Americans understand that. But the bigger challenge is that as India's economy begins to grow and it takes that number three position or number four position, uh, where does India fit in? I mean, we can go into the details, but I just wanted to lay that out up front.
So, Dr. Kamran, just coming back to you on this particular point, in fact, what Americans really want from India? For instance, just recently, Senator Marco Rubio brought a bill saying that, okay, we should give everything to India, and we should also have we should also activate the CARTSA Act. We should not activate the CARTSA Act where even India wants to buy S-400 or what else it wants to buy. We shouldn't stop India. So, what's so specific? Do you believe that Indians want the Americans want that there will come a time India will stand against China? So, are the Americans preparing India for China in any military conflict, which they do believe? Just the presidential candidate Donald Trump saw that I see a war in Asia being shown. Recently, he gave a statement. So, what Americans really want from India is just China, or the new institutional architecture or the military architecture which they want to install is something like that.
No, that's a really good question. And, well, I'm going to set aside what former President Donald Trump says because we have to sort of take that with a grain of salt because he's in campaign mode and he has his way of saying things that don't necessarily translate into policy. Even under his administration, we saw the huge gap between campaign promises and actual policy deliverables. So that aside, to answer your question, I think the Americans realize that uh, India is not at a point where it can play a very big role well, let's just say Indo-Pacific, but particularly the Western Pacific Basin. I'm talking pure military terms here. Uh, the evidence for that is manifold. So there's a reason why there's something called AUKUS, which is Australia, UK, and US. There's another relationship that involves the Japanese, another one with the Philippines, and these are all cropping up, in the last several months to maximum a year. Why isn't India part of that? India is not part of that because India has yet to sort of project maritime power, naval power in the Indian Ocean basin. So to expect it to go and play a role in the Pacific is getting ahead of yourself, way ahead of yourself. And so I think India will take its time. And I would add that, just like a few days ago, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense both announced jointly that there is going to be, a beefing up of the U.S. investment in military bases in northern Australia, and of course the Philippines as well. So why is this happening? Why isn't India in this picture? The reason is simple: is that India is not at that level just yet. There is another problem that the Americans, I think, recognize, which is that China, through its sort of what I call strategic poking on the Himalayan frontier between China and India, is distracting India from playing that kind of military role. Now, the Indians are definitely reorganizing, their military command structure. There's an ambitious plan to overhaul and spend more money on the Navy than historically they've done. So they have this naval command in Karwar in the southwest coast of India, and so they're developing that. They have a command structure in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, but these are all just getting going. They're nascent efforts. They're not there yet. They will take time. for a country to become a naval power of any worth takes time. It's not just the acquisition of hardware. And this is where I think many American policymakers tend to, or commentators tend to overestimate China, where oh, they have far more ships than we do. We need to build more ships. That is true, but then there's the question of quality, and then there's the question of humanware. China doesn't have the experience of blue water navigation, and the United States has close to 200 years of experience. So these things need to be factored in. Now, coming back to India, India is just getting started on this process. So that is why I think that the United States is mindful, and it's allowing India to take its time. Now, the Indians are also looking at what's happening to Russia, and they are wondering. They have to be wondering that if this present trend continues, then how reliable is Russia as a supplier of military hardware for India? So they are also thinking of reducing their dependency on Russia. I mean, if Russia has to reach out to Iran and North Korea, I mean, we're talking about the second largest military of the world with its own industrial base and its own platforms, and they're not bad, and they're pretty good. I mean, this is from the legacy, comes from the Soviet era. So if that's what's happening, and there are already delays in deliveries of certain systems to the Indians, so the Indians have to say, okay, we need to chart a course out of this dependency. Let's see who else we can acquire from. But that's a slow process, because you can't, in the short term, jump from one platform, which is Russian in this case, to Western platforms. So these are challenges, and I think India needs time. It needs shakedown time. It needs a longer runway to become that player. So that's why I think it's a realistic outlook from Washington.
So you are absolutely right. And I think because of the war in Middle East, the Americans' technology transfer to India is also getting slower, and there is a frustration in India that why it is taking so much time. That this technology transfer is getting slow, because they consider themselves in the midst of the war, getting Rafale from Russia, drones from America and Israel. Ambassador Azaz, coming to you, the Pakistan-U.S. relations are already downgraded. In the present dispensation in Washington, we have seen that no one has come in Pakistan at the Secretary of State level, neither the Secretary of Defense nor the Secretary of State level. Just recently, we saw that Donald Lu was talking about $101 million for Pakistan as an aid. And one of the things which I listened, and that was very laughable, to counter China. So $101 million only for countering China or helping Pakistan economically, and then in security assistance. How do you see this downgrading of relations with Pakistan? Do you believe that the Americans have understood that only the Pakistan-U.S. cooperation is going to be in fighting the transnational terrorist organizations? And yes, America is still the largest exporting partner of Pakistan, but how do you see this? Where are we going in Pakistan-U.S. relations?
Yeah, certainly. But before that, if I may add something to what Mr. Bukhari was saying. I think there, I think both countries, India and US, are discovering limits to their strategic partnership. Mr. Bukhari did allude to that. For example, India's lack of keenness to join the West Pacific Theater and focus more on Indian Ocean. And then there is also India's desire to, maintain economic and investment ties with China, while US is trying to de-risk and de-link as much as possible the global economy from China. India is actually going ahead. And in the last two meetings that the foreign ministers of India and China had recently, they spoke about stability on the line of actual control. which is actually the only irritant at the moment between the two countries. So you cannot rule out the possibility that India will like to keep its relationship with China strong enough not to be totally dependent, or not to be totally act as a counterweight, as an American counterweight for China. I also see that there are other factors, particularly the Russia factor. Yes, it is true that uh, Indians are diversifying their options, particularly in terms of defense equipment, from Russia to America and perhaps some other sources, including Israel. But Russia still holds considerable, uh, considerable role in the inventory that India possesses at the moment. Plus, mind you, India has been exploring the possibility of trading in non-US dollar currencies, including through the platform of BRICS. Uh, and India is also trying to project itself as a leader of the global south, as if it will represent the global south when it comes to major power competition. So I think Americans are quite clear that it is not easy to manipulate India, which is now a major power in its own right, to act the way America would want it to act. Now, for the Pakistan US relationship that you mentioned, first of all, the military investments by the US into India's military capabilities, particularly a series of foundational agreements giving access uh, access to each other's logistics, encrypted communications, geospatial intelligence, even other technologies such as manufacturing some of the equipment, including aircraft F414 in India, and supplying India armed drones and other capabilities. Now, all these have serious security implications for Pakistan, because India has not made it a secret that it wants to isolate Pakistan internationally and is doing its best to demonize Pakistan, and therefore all this military capability will be used against, could be used against Pakistan. It is true that there is a debate in India going on whether it should make a shift from continental to maritime space that Mr. Bukhari also alluded to. The Indian Army is resisting that, citing that we have the two borders which are unsettled borders, their northern and their western borders, and therefore they are reluctant to do that. Yet, I think the shift is towards the maritime space, and there too, since bulk of Pakistan's trade passes through the maritime space, we have a challenge. So you have both kinds of challenges in military terms, speaking in military terms for Pakistan. Now, what choices that does Pakistan have? I think the US is still continuing to stay engaged with Pakistan, not through economic assistance, as you rightly mentioned, that is insignificant and inconsequential. But US would also not like uh, to totally depend on India, because it could see that India might get too big for its boots one day, and Pakistan would be a good check. And so India, they would like to maintain links with Pakistan, but more importantly, they would like to keep links with Pakistan because they don't want it to land in China's fold completely. So they are consistently trying to wean Pakistan away from China as much as possible. If the lines get drawn too sharply, then for sure China will get a strategic access to Indian Ocean, as has been speculated. And I don't think Americans would want that to happen. So I think Americans would remain engaged with Pakistan, but in a very, very low key. Even if uh, Donald Trump makes it to White House, or Kamala or whoever is nominated by the Democratic Convention makes it to I don't think that trajectory of Pakistan in Pakistan US low profile relationship will change. I think that will stay that way, and we should not pain any hopes. You mentioned counterterrorism. Yes, counterterrorism is a major issue, but at the moment, I think not only America and Europe, but even the neighbors of Afghanistan think that it is Pakistan's problem. That TTP is a serious issue for Pakistan, and all others are manageable. I think that will be a miscalculation and a big mistake, because today it is Pakistan's problem, but tomorrow it could be problem for all other neighbors as well as the rest of the world. Thank you.
So Dr. Kamran, coming to you, I have this question that Prime Minister Modi is hosting the Global South Conference in August this month. Uh, and Americans are supporting basically India's perspective on Global South, and so that the Chinese are not someone overtaking the Global South. But meanwhile, India is also in the major anti-Western blocs like BRICS and SCO. So at times when America is very much interested in policy of de-risking, where they wants to have India and give India support of as a friend shoring to shift all the industry from China to India, how does Americans cope up with this? So India is in the anti-Western blocs, but yes, India is important in friend shoring and in de-risking. How do you see this?
So, Kamar, I think that it's important to realize that the worth and value of SCO and BRICS. There are great convening places, but they have nothing common that binds them together in an effective manner, other than that they want to be, anti-West, or they want to be something as an alternative to the West and the Western international rules-based order, or carving a space out for them within that framework. But the reality is that India and China do not see eye to eye on many things. Yes, India wants investment. When it comes to China, India wants to not be threatened by China, and that's not an insignificant threat. But at the same time, it wants to have that trade relationship. So it's not like they have a whole lot of convergence of interests. There's a lot of talk, and I think we read too much into what President Xi and President Putin like to say about the relationship between their countries. Uh, but the reality is that they are in two different areas of the world, and there's very little help that they can give to one another based on the other's needs. So, what are the needs of China right now? China needs to come to terms with the United States, reach an understanding where this flight of capital that is happening from China and trying to go investments going to other destination does not happen. Number two is technology transfer. They would like to, basically not have that disruption in terms of the technology transfer. They also don't want trade restrictions, but at the same time, they have this imperative to be a great power. So something has to give. On each of these things, it is a U.S. China or China Western conversation. Russia has no role to play in this. Russia cannot help in any substantive way. I'm not talking about tactical level help. Likewise, if you take the Russian need, Russia's immediate need is to reach some sort of a settlement. They've taken certain amount of territories in Ukraine. What they want is the line to be drawn there and say, okay, you know what? We're going to have a ceasefire. They need some time to recuperate from the war, a war that has exposed very badly their vulnerabilities. And so their economy isn't doing well either. There are a lot of pressures on them. Can China help on that? It cannot. So when we talk about SCO and we talk about there's a lot of these meetings happen. There are a lot of statements issued. There's a lot of media coverage, but substantively, in a geopolitical sense or even a geoeconomic sense, I don't see much coming forth. So SCO is supposed to be a security organization. for security purposes. But there's also the reality. They will. It comes out in the media sometimes, not that often, but and the Chinese and the Russians like to keep a lid on these things. But the reality is that Russia's footprint in its near abroad is receding. And I'm talking about Central Asia. China's footprint is expanding in Central Asia because China has the financial bandwidth to invest in Central Asia. And therefore, there's a new reality coming. So, what is SCO then? This is not something that the Russians take kindly. They would not want to lose influence, but there's not much they can do about it. So it's a very much more complicated picture. So from an American point of view, uh, what is there to be worried about in any significant way? As for non-dollar denominated currencies and trade and whatnot, uh, I'm not an economist and I'm not a financial expert by no means. But one thing I do know is that investors, where do they want to park their money? Do they want to park their money in the yuan, the ruble, the rupee? What alternative currency are they willing to park their money in? If the investors don't have confidence over a certain currency, they're not going to go for it. So the worth of a currency is based on how much confidence people have, and that's how this system works. Like it or not, the dollar is still the dominant currency of the world, and I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. So again, there's a lot of hype, but in substantive terms, there is not much there. As for India, and going back to what Ambassador Azaz was talking about, it's not a zero-sum game, I think, when it comes to the US and looking at this Pakistan-China relationship. So if you look at it from one point of view, uh, America realizes that Pakistan needs a lot of financial assistance. It is not in the interest of the United States to see Pakistan spiral out of control and destabilize when there's already a strategic vacuum called Afghanistan. And then they have a troubled relationship with Iran. And so they don't want that. So if the Chinese are helping in some shape or form where the Americans cannot help for a variety of reasons, then that's okay. It's not like, if you look at Pakistan, Pakistan's needs are much more immediate. They're much more basic. So is China going to be able to use Pakistan in a way anytime soon that threatens America? I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of room for maneuver there. And therefore, it's fine. Nations have relationships with each other. Look, we have a very complicated relationship with Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally. It does not want to leave NATO. It's very firmly entrenched in that bloc. But under this government of President Erdogan, Turkey has been, trying to flex unilateral muscle. It wants to be a power unto its own. So it wants to retain the ability of unilateral action while maintaining its membership in NATO. And this is creating complications and many complications with the Americans on multiple frontiers. But is that relationship deteriorating? No, it's neither here nor there. I think expectations are reshaped. And this isn't just the United States. Any two nations will realize that, hey, what can we achieve from one another? And they move from there. They try to find that common ground. It's not easy, but that's there's no other way.
So, Dr. Kamran, I have a question, and that question is about that. Pakistan has been fighting terrorism with the Americans. We have been, the partners in fighting terrorism. But the Indians want that America should look Pakistan from Indian lens. There was a Quad summit very recently in Japan, where in a joint communique they did mention the militant organizations like LAT and Jaish-e-Mohammed in the Quad summit, and they also mentioned Al Qaeda and Islamic State. So the point here is that for how long Americans will keep on doing this, that they do understand that Pakistan is a valuable partner in fighting terrorism. But when they sit with the Indians, they will talk about, okay, these organizations, they are, yes, they are globally designated terrorist organizations. We do understand the leadership is in jail and all that. We know that. So why, how do you see this particular lens, that where they basically force every partner, either it is Japan or the United States, to look Pakistan from this lens? How do you bring this equation in this Pakistan-US relations?
So I think nations can persuade other nations if they have influence, and it's not like the United States or Japan or some other actor is just going to say, okay, you know what, the Indian perspective is absolutely right. They understand the Indian perspective. They understand what the Indian interest is in making these arguments. But the reality is that from an American perspective, from a Japanese perspective, or someone else's perspective, the problem still exists. There is a problem that needs to be resolved. And so I think the Americans don't necessarily agree with the Indians on everything. I think there is a lot of overlap in interest. So, when it comes to the Jaish-e-Mohammeds of this world, the Lashkar-e-Tayyibas, the whatever other organizations that are out there, there's a convergence of interest. But it's not as if the Americans are going to say, oh, okay, you know what, then we need to put our eggs in the Indian basket, and then, we need to gang up, for a lack of a better term, against Pakistan. Because at the end, strategically speaking, it is not in the interest of neither the United States nor India to put too much pressure to where Pakistan becomes even more weaker as a polity. This is not in their long-term interest. I mean, I can't speak for India, but one has to assume that if you are becoming the fifth largest, if you've become the fifth largest economy and you're eyeing number 3 position, and you are a global player, then how much time are you going to spend on Pakistan? How much of time are you going to spend on Pakistan when you have to deal with China, when you have to deal with other issues? So I think that things are shifting in India. It doesn't come across through in the media, but media anywhere in any country has a logic of its own, and therefore the conversation isn't that nuanced, much less sophisticated. But if you really look deeper, go beyond what sort of comes out in the media, and look at sort of the objective geopolitical realities, I think from an Indian point of view, they're not as worried about Pakistan as they used to. Yes, there's still the problem, and these days Jammu has become an issue because of the terrorist attacks there and the insurgency that's taking place there, low intensity. But where is that in the grander scheme of things? If you're sitting in New Delhi, how big of a problem is Jammu versus Aksai Chin, Arunachal Pradesh, and the 60,000 troops that are sitting on the other side of the Indian-Chinese border? The reports coming in that the fifth-generation aircraft that are being parked by the Chinese on mountaintops not far from the border, that forces India to redeploy resources that it could use somewhere else. My point is that I think we have to look at sort of the priority and the hierarchy of needs and we have to use empathetic analysis to look at, so how are the Indians really talking about it? Not how they're saying it in the media, not how the leaders come out and say things in a public rally or for political purposes. There's a need to disentangle, and I know it's hard, the politics from the actual policy and the broader strategic thinking.
So, Ambassador Azaz, Pakistan has been saying this for quite a long time, and we have shared the dossiers with the P5 countries that the Indians have been sponsoring terrorist organizations, either those are the TTP militants hiding in Afghanistan or the Baloch militants somewhere. Why the world doesn't listen to Pakistan's concerns? Why there is an existential threat, and Pakistan has just announced. Azma Istehkam, a comprehensive counter-terrorism campaign. So why the world doesn't listen to Pakistan? Because they are anti-China, terrorist organizations like the Baloch militant organizations are targeting the Chinese interest. Even the TTP is targeting the Chinese interest. So why Pakistan's concerns are not taken very serious while we are facing, the military is engaged and the nation is facing the threats daily?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Mr. Bukhari's comment that nations have, the ability to influence other nations depending on their own strength. And even if the other nations do not agree with your viewpoint, they'll stay quiet because they think that they have other business to do with you. Pakistan, unfortunately, lately has lost its political relevance, mainly because of a very weak and weakening economy, and also with almost non-existence bit of the state to control all these militant organizations. And you don't expect the world to come into Pakistan to control these organizations. It's Pakistan's own baby. And therefore, they would not like to come out to stand with Pakistan to fight TTP. It's Pakistan's problem, and they would like Pakistan to handle it. So I think they sit at a distance. They do not really want to get entangled in any manner. So you may say that they're not perhaps listening to Pakistan. No, they are listening to Pakistan, but they think that it's not for them to get involved with this problem. Now, a few other comments that I want to make with regard to what Mr. Bukhari had to say. One is the United States uh, not objecting to China filling some of the gaps in Pakistan that China can do that. Such as financial bailouts in rollovers, because otherwise it lands in America's lap to do so. But also the Chinese have always been exhorting Pakistan to have good relations with United States, because the Chinese themselves have not been picking up any quarrels or especially any kinetic confrontation with the US. They need time to continue rising peacefully as long as they can. They are not yet in a position to challenge the number one position that US has in a large number of domains, particularly in the military domain, where it is the largest military spender, more than the next 8 combined. So therefore, I think the Chinese would want also Pakistan to have friendly relations, not only with the US, but they also want Pakistan to have friendly relations with India. And that takes me to the second point that he had made, that, India makes it a point that it reflects these terrorist organizations in the joint statements wherever it goes. And you just mentioned the Quad statement and many others. Mainly because, not that they share India's agenda, but mainly because I think for India, Pakistan is a domestic issue, an internal issue, has always been. Even look at any election campaign, including the recent one, you find that Pakistan was at the right and center of India's election campaign. Whereas in Pakistan, that has never been the case. Indian leaders have also used Pakistan as a talking point for addressing some of their own fault lines within their own countries. And so that's something that I would say we should be ready to accept, that India will continue to talk about it. But we know the reality is different. Reality is that other than these recent attacks in Jammu, where, as you know, India's election results were not also as expected, there is indigenous problem there. But uh, uh, it is India's terrorism happening, unfolding in Pakistan that we are worried about. The targeted killings that India has carried out, and our foreign secretary announced that 20 of them in 2023, much like what happened in Canada and US and Australia. So Pakistan has its own concerns. But the day Pakistan becomes a politically stable country and economically, recovers its economy, the world will begin to listen to us because we are a fifth largest in population and we are a military power and nuclear power. The day we put our house in order, the world will begin to listen to us. I don't think India's mantra of cross-border terrorism is being shared in earnest by other powers. Yes, they listen to it. Yes, they are ready to go along, but they never convey to us directly that this is what India's concern is. Please address them. They don't do that because they think that that is much of it is India's own propaganda. There's very little terrorism happening inside India that can be sourced to Pakistan at this time. And most of these proscribed organizations, their leadership is behind bars. But I also agree with Mr. Buhari's earlier remark that it is not in the larger interest of the US, nor even India, to destabilize Pakistan beyond a point. Because if that happens, all hell will break loose. They couldn't even manage Iraq and Afghanistan, and let alone Pakistan, which is a huge country. And therefore, it is in their own interest. But I would not really like to blame India or US or anyone else. I would say action lies with our own leaders, with ourselves. Pakistan has to put up its relevance by strengthening itself, by stabilizing itself. And that won't happen from outside, it will happen from inside. So our main challenge is internal, not external.
Hmm. So that makes the case that we have to put our house in order. You're absolutely right. And for so many reasons, we have been occupied because of the political challenges at home. The leadership doesn't want to talk with each other, the meddling into the democratic process, and the leadership doesn't have a view how to move forward. This is an unending discussion on this India-US partnership. But I would go for asking Dr. Kamran Bukhari for any concluding thoughts that shall Pakistan be hopeful that the Pakistan-US relations will remain in good shape in coming years, despite there is a comprehensive global India-US strategic partnership.
No, thank you, Kamar. Look, I think Ambassador Azaz really hit the nail on the head. Pakistan has a lot of homework to do. Pakistan needs to focus on that. Pakistan needs to demonstrate progress in solving its problems in a demonstrable way. It cannot solve all its problems. The world is not expecting Pakistan, neither are the Chinese nor are the Americans. As much as they are concerned about what's happening in Pakistan, they also understand that Pakistan cannot flip on a dime. It will need time. But what does that mean for Pakistani leadership, civil, military, all of them? They need to come to they need to end this political bickering. They need to end this zero sum view of political power. They have to reach an understanding. I understand it's difficult. I'm empathetic. I mean, I'm equidistant from everybody. I don't have preferences. I have no pony in this race. But to everybody, from the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz to PTI to People's Party to everybody else, the smaller regional parties, to the military establishment, to the judiciary, whoever's the stakeholder, if I'm missing anybody. But the point is, they all need to come together and they can't waste time. Pakistan is in a very difficult position. They have to realize and they have to look forward. What will Pakistan, if this thing continues, where does Pakistan stand 1 year from now, 2, 3, 5 years from now? The situation will deteriorate. I don't even want to imagine what will happen because it's just frightening. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there are low hanging fruits that can be accomplished, that can be picked, and focus on those. I'm nobody to tell what there are, but I'm just an analyst who believes that there are things that are doable. There are things that are right now are insurmountable. You just have to do it piecemeal. You have to chip away It's one day at a time, and you have to set up your goals and say, okay. And once you start to demonstrate that Pakistan is now pulling out of its crisis, then the world becomes more engaging. Then there's incentive for other countries to come in and say, okay, now there's this place is showing promise. We can do things because look, this is a world of interest, and so while the situation is very, very tough in Pakistan right now, but to put it, to end this on an optimistic note, uh, there's still a lot of room to turn this thing around, and we just need to get cracking on it. And everybody needs to do what they need to do and move forward. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to. Not going to happen quickly, but there's no other choice but to take this piecemeal.
Hmm. Any concluding thoughts, Ambassador Azaz? And we can.
Well, I would say that Pakistan has the necessary elements that can constitute for its economic recovery, for its political stability. It has a population which is hardworking, intelligent, young. It has fertile land. It has mineral-rich mountains. It has a good coastline. I think it has every resource, human and natural, that can make it turn around the situation that it is in. One. Second, I think that Pakistan's economic geography is a treasure that Pakistan hasn't availed of. And geoeconomics is something that we really need to start focusing on rather than just geostrategy. I'm not saying give up geostrategy, but alongside geostrategic goals, you should have concrete geopolitical goals, geoeconomic goals. And that would require putting neighborhood first, because you cannot avail of geoeconomic geography if your relations with your neighbors are not the best of your relationships. And finally, we have to have positive relationship with all major powers, because as we explained, they want you to really recover, because they have also a lot of stakes in the stability of Pakistan. So you can maintain good relations with US, with China, with Russia, with others, provided we do the first three that I have mentioned. And I see every reason that Pakistan should should do that. And I do hope sooner than later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamran Bukhari. Thank you very much, Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry. It was a very well thought out, very important discussion we had. And the best advice for Pakistan is look inward, resolve your issues. There is a lot of work we have to do at home. That's the only way. We need to look the other developments in the region. So nothing to worry on this India-US strategic partnership, but our homework should be done properly. Thank you very much once again for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Saab.
Thank you.